Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable Behavior Explained. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Kelly O'Horo, your host of Adaptable, and today I'm going to talk about a topic that is really personal. It's what I'm currently going through, and interestingly, I seem to attract clients that have a lot of parallel processing in their lives. Maybe that's all therapists, but currently I've just noticed a few clients on my caseload struggling with the care of a declining parent or a sick parent. And so I thought I would do another episode on this because it's a really, really challenging season in our lives. And not everybody goes through the loss or the decline of a parent in rapid fashion. Sometimes it takes a long time and it's gradual. And so there's kind of a constant looking at yourself and reevaluating what is it that we need to be doing right now based on my current capacity, my parents' current needs, and it really requires a lot of digging in deep. So if you're wrestling with decisions about a parent's care or wondering, when you're supposed to step in, and of course feeling the weight of oftentimes grief or guilt or sometimes even resentment, then this episode is going to be for you. So, like I said, I'm currently going through this right now. My mom has been ill for about 10 months. She started declining a little bit before that, but she was going into liver failure, and we've been through a variety of surgeries, a transplant, and then several complications following her surgery. And so it's really given me pause on how to address and deal with this topic because it's just really hard. But ultimately, caretaking a parent is really a profound act of love, and sometimes it's heartbreaking. You're called to make choices about their care and their lives, often with little guidance and, of course, with a lot of emotion. And so you're asking yourself things like, am I enabling them or am I helping them? And when is something too much? And when is stepping in necessary? And then when is it that it's time to let go and let nature take its natural course, or let the person take their own agency? And so if you're struggling with any of those things, you're not alone. So imagine that your mom insists on living alone after a fall. And even though she's struggling with memory or cognition is starting to decline, you want to honor her independence, but you're also terrified that she'll get hurt again. And you kind of don't know. Do I step in? Do I let them try? Is it potentially life-threatening if something happens again? And would your, interruption have prevented something that could be avoidable? These are these crossroads that so many of us in a caretaking role face, and it's really hard, and it's hard every day. And so, please know that there's resources, but mostly it's about finding connection and supports when this is going on. So let's talk about the practicality of things. We all have only so many minutes in our lives, and let's face it, when our parents start to decline in age, our lives don't just stop. We still have our jobs and our responsibilities and our commitments and our other family members that we, have time that we spend with them and things like that. And so we first look at the limitations on time. So we've got to look at them and say, what do they need? And honestly assess those needs honestly. What can they do safely by themselves? What things are slipping, and what areas do we need to offer potential modifications in their activities of daily living? What do we need to do? I know that as my mom started to decline, one of the first things we did was installed safety rails in her bathroom for the shower and for the bathroom when she got out, so that she would have less of a chance to slip and more safe things to hold on to. And that was a small intervention, but something that we needed to be proactive about. But you want to ask yourself, am I helping them maintain independence, or am I taking over out of our own fear or of our own guilt? So this is where we have to look at that line of enabling versus helping. Helping means supporting their autonomy and their dignity. Enabling means shielding them from their own consequences that might actually prompt needed change or care. And it's a tricky dance, especially if you have a propensity to be an overfunctioner. I know that's my adaptation, is overfunction and step in before anyone even asks, because I'm very I want to help people avoid their discomfort and ultimately my own discomfort of watching people suffer. And so they're my personal work that I've had to unpack. And so if that resonates with you, check out the episodes on codependency and boundaries, because those are going to be good ones for you to watch. But let me give you an example of this kind of toiling the line between enabling and helping. Let's say your dad keeps forgetting to take his medication and you start calling him every morning to remind him, but then he still misses doses. And eventually you realize it's time to set up like a pill organizer or arrange for a visiting nurse to come make sure it happens. So helping is about finding solutions that empower and help one remain autonomous, not just patching over problems. I will say on the topic of medication, there's an outstanding resource called The Hero, and it is a machine that houses the medications, and it's monitored by an app that you can have on your phone as the caretaker, as can the patient themselves, and you can see and monitor medications from afar. You can also load up to like 10 pills in this machine. It's so awesome, and Medicare covers it, so it's not even something you have to pay out of pocket. It's like $36 a month for Medicare, this little machine. So anyways, highly recommend checking out The Hero. We'll put the link in to that app in the description below. But back to the thing about when is it that time to take over and when is it, enabling? Do you have a medical power of attorney, and when do you start to exercise that? Well, the answer is when they can no longer make safe decisions about their health or about their finances. This is when you're going to need to step in. So when their judgment is impaired by their illness or dementia, or their confusion is too profound and they keep mixing things up that are really potentially dangerous, you have to kind of step in. And this is when professionals will advise that it's time for you to take over. So let me give you another example. Let's say a friend shared how her mother, after having a stroke, began making really risky financial decisions. And the family really struggled with guilt, but ultimately stepping in as medical power of attorney protected her from harming herself and ultimately ensuring that her wishes were respected. And so we have to figure out what's the difference and when should we really step in. So I recently saw a reel with Hassan Minhaj and Mel Robbins, and they were talking about the let them theory. And I loved the example that they gave because, he's talking about like, when do you step in, or when do you let go, or when is letting go not safe? And it really resonated with me. So with the let them theory, it says that we should let people make their own choices, even if we disagree with how they're handling something. But when it comes to a declining parent, letting them can mean worse illness or potentially even death. And so again, how do we find the line there? So let's say your parent refuses to use a walker. They insist that they're fine, and you want to respect their autonomy, but after a second fall and a broken hip and a surgery that follows, you realize that letting them isn't loving. So sometimes you have to step in and insist that this is necessary even when it's uncomfortable. And that's where we have to recognize what are they currently capable of and what are the potential outcomes of not stepping in. As a therapist, we're mandatory reporters, and we're listening for things like, is someone letting an elderly adult, be neglected, or are they being harmed? And this is where you have to kind of ask yourself, if I don't step in, is this potentially neglect? And this is really where grief and guilt and resentment can creep in, because you feel like maybe you're betraying them, or you're losing the parent that you knew because that relationship has changed so drastically. And you might even resent the burden because you're overwhelmed in your own priorities and your own stressors in your own life. And then when you prioritize your own life, then you feel guilty that you want your own life back. And so it's a really complicated factor. And of course, you don't want them gone, right? None of us ever want them gone. And so it's really tricky. It's a hard time. And so you've got to figure out how to navigate the grief and the resentment and the potential guilt. And caretaking really brings up a storm of emotions. And so, a natural emotion that comes when our parent declines is the grief, right? We're losing the parent that we had. We're losing the relationship that we once had, and the help and support that perhaps they offered, that changes too, because the roles, flip. And you're dealing with caretaking and ultimately the life that you're putting on hold because of the pause in your own life that you need to step in and help them. And so sometimes we end up also dealing with resentment, maybe towards other siblings who aren't helping and it's putting all the burden on your shoulders, or toward the parent for needing so much. Or, what a friend of ours says is, and actually I did a show on this, on like the avoidable crisis, right? So let's say a parent had made choices along their life about maybe how they ate. And so they had mismanaged diabetes, and which caused further health implications. And so you have to really clean up the resentment around, sort of they did this to themselves because the long-term effect of their previous choices created problems. And then you're there having to clean up the mess unless you want to abandon them. It's just tricky. So you're resentful towards maybe their choices or towards the situation in and of itself. And so these are hard. And then, maybe we feel guilty for feeling resentful. I know I went through that. I had to do a lot of work on that. Like I wanting a break or wanting things to have been different in the past so that we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. And the guilt for having to make hard choices that maybe they're mad at you for. And so it's just really challenging. And so sometimes, you might find yourself snapping at a parent or being really irritable after a long day. And then you feel really bad about the guilt because you weren't compassionate. And that's maybe not in line with your values or how you want to show up. Or maybe, like I said, you resent siblings for not stepping up or helping. Or maybe part of the issue is you don't have the courage to ask for help, and you struggle with your own sense of not wanting to burden others. So all of these feelings are really normal. You're not a normal. Make sure you're not alone and that these feelings are normal. Make sure you acknowledge these feelings. Name what you're feeling. Talk about it with someone you love or someone that you trust, and try to have moments of normalizing these experiences, because, maybe this goes on for a long time. And so part of it is recognizing you can't do it by yourself. That's really hard, especially if you were formerly a really independent person. The other thing is sharing the load is necessary. You want to delegate when possible. Ask for help from family, from friends, from other professionals. This can be a marathon, and so you've got to divide and conquer when it comes to this, because our lives don't just stop when we're called to help with an aging parent. And then, of course, like in all relationships, we have to set boundaries, internal boundaries, external boundaries. We can't do it all, and it's okay to say no. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to continue your own life, and balancing your own life's priorities and delegating to others when you need to. Because I think a lot of times what we forget when we're in this role is that we matter too. We're prioritizing the needs of the person who needs our care, and because it's more dire or it's more stressful or maybe even life-threatening, we kind of table our own priorities in our own life because it seems like it's okay. But if we do that for too long, we end up pouring from an empty cup, and that is only something that we can sustain for so long. We can't pour from an empty cup. We have to rejuvenate our own cup. We have to have our own self-care. And so, again, back to the delegation, it's really going to be necessary at times. Use home health aides. There's some adult day programs that might be useful. There's respite care. There's all kinds of ways that we can enlist resources to help us balance this. And then, of course, at the crux of all of it is communication. You've got to be honest with your family about what you can do, what you can't do, what you need help with, what support looks like, and you've got to communicate that. If you don't communicate, people don't know what you're going through. They can't be there for you to be supportive if you don't express what it is that you need. And so communication is key, as in all relationships. That is the truth. And then we have to look at planning ahead. You want to talk about medical power of attorney. We want to talk about living wills and get those things in order. Care preferences before there's a crisis. What do people want done when they do pass? What are their after life wishes? And how do we make sure we can get those things set up so that we're not dealing with that at the same time as the loss? So I had a client that talked to me about hiring a part-time caregiver so that she could keep her job and still care for her dad. And she felt really guilty at first, but as soon as she realized that delegating allowed her to just show up with more patience and more love and more kindness, rather than the frustration and the resentment over having to be not just the caretaker, but also the daughter, she was actually able to be more kind when she was with her parent. So It's important to remember that you're doing the best you can in an impossibly hard situation, and perfection can't be the goal because there's no such thing as the perfection. Presence is really the goal. Being present, maintaining the relationship, protecting the love and the compassion is really the priority during this hard season. And giving yourself some grace when you get it wrong. And again, circle back and repair when you do. So when this is part of your life, we've got to look at balance. We've got to look at kind of reclaiming our joy and becoming adaptable in these moments. And caretaking can really feel like it just swallows your life. But adaptability means finding moments of joy, even when they're really short, even when they're small, looking for gratitude everywhere that you can, because these seasons can be long to endure. Maybe, you and your parents share a laugh over old photos, or you reminisce and talk about things that you used to do. But finding quiet moments for yourself with, a cup of coffee and a sunset, or a cup of coffee and a sunrise, or just taking in a sunset. Really, those quiet moments of gratitude are so important, and they help you to remind yourself that you're still you, and your parent is still more than their illness. And that's hard to remember when you're really consumed with the caretaking responsibilities. Remember to celebrate small wins every time that you advocate, every time that you ask for help, every time that you set a boundary. You're growing, you're putting yourself first, you're navigating a hard time, and it gives you an opportunity to reconnect with yourself. And again, finding moments that are just yours, even if they're brief. Remember, even when it's hard, that you're not failing, you are loving. This is a tremendous act of love and compassion and kindness, and oftentimes sacrifice. And so, again, please be kind to yourself. This isn't about fixing everything. It's about bending without breaking. It's about doing the best you can, honoring your limits along the way, and realizing that every day is going to present you with new challenges, and try to just look at what you can accomplish that day and what you can honor, and then what you need to delegate and pass off. So hopefully this is not your long-term situation in your life. This is a challenging season, and caretaking a sick or declining parent really is an act of love, but it's also an act of courage. You've got to dig deep. So facing your grief, facing your guilt, facing resentments can be challenging, but when you do, you're going to find your strength, the compassion, and ultimately connection with this person. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please know that you're not alone with this. And if this episode resonated for you, please make sure to subscribe and leave us a comment. Share it with someone who might be going through this. And, of course, drop a line and connect with me. I read all of my comments from the show, and I will respond. So thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, remember that you're doing your best, and don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.